Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Today in this second lecture on persuasive speaking, we're going to be talking about the different types of speeches and structures that you can use in your persuasive speeches. It's really cool. I liked this part of the lessons, I guess, is because it builds off what we actually just talked about previously in the last lecture. If you remember, we were talking about how people have different beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors that they engage in, and that you have to consider those when you are persuading someone. Well, it's really cool. There's three different kinds of speeches that you can categorize for persuasive presentations that kind of get at the heart of each of those three things. So if you're thinking about trying to do something more oriented towards behavior or trying to help someone change their mind about something, there are three speech types that you can use to try to orient yourself towards those issues. And in persuasive speaking, those specifically are speeches of fact, value, and policy. For many of you, policy is probably one that immediately comes to mind, especially if you lived and grew up in the United States, because it's a very democratic process, and it's very focused on policy, though all cultures and countries really have some element of it. But in the United States particularly, there's a lot of focus on policy. And what better way to start than first jump in with the speech of fact? Your book talks about how speeches of fact, they argue the truth or falsity of a belief, claim, or position. And if you remember from the lecture last week, there's that word, belief. Speeches of fact really do deal with whether or not something is true or false and one's belief about those things. So, for example, if we had a flat earther and, I was so tempted to say normal person. that would be so mean. If we had a flat earther in the room and someone who believes that the earth is spherical, that it's round, this would be an argument, it would be a speech of whether or not that is true or false. If the question is whether or not the earth is flat, we would argue whether that is true or false. Not anything against people who believe in flat earth, but I just have to respectfully say you're wrong, because I think there's a lot of scientific evidence to show that it is spherical. So if you're one of those conspiracists, this might be a great speech for you to think about the truth or falsity of one of those kinds of claims. But you get the idea. That's what a speech of fact is. Your book gives a lot of different examples of what these kinds of speeches could look like, particularly on page 298. If you have, this might be the older version actually, but in my book, there's an example of how nuclear waste can be stored safely in deep underground rock formations. So that would be a speech of fact. We're arguing whether or not it's true that nuclear waste can be stored safely underground, or whether or not that's false. Or maybe something in between, but it's usually just discussing the validity or truth of that statement, or falsity. Another example your book gives is allowing citizens to carry concealed handguns in public places will deter crime, and that's also another example of a speech of fact. We're arguing whether or not a citizen's right to carry a concealed handgun deters crime. Is that true? Is that false? Is it somewhere in between? But we're assessing the truth or falsity of that belief, of that claim, or that particular position. That's a speech of fact. It's just really dealing with facts. It's dealing with things that you can just assess. Is this in fact factually true, or is this not true? Then we move up, well, before we get to speech of value, there are two different strategies you can implement for effective speeches of fact. And one of them is this refutative pattern. I think that's how we say it. And basically, you just follow a four-step process. Basically, you state the point or argument you are going to refute. So if we use the flat earth example, my opponent believes that my colleague believes that the earth is flat. So you might state their position. But then you'd list the errors of their opposing arguments and support it with evidence, figures, examples, testimonies. My colleague believes that the earth is flat, but today I would like to show you through three key facts that this is in fact false. And then you would state your alternative position, provide evidence for it. You would explain how that argument or position refutes maybe the flat earth position, right? Or vice versa. Maybe you're arguing for flat earth. If you do that, that would be really... I would be so interested to see that. I think that would make my day. Anyway, so that's one particular strategy you can use. A second strategy is a causal pattern. And basically it is, either way, you're always going to have your thesis, whether you use the first one or the causal one. And then you basically put 2 points together. The first one is a cause. Sunscreen blocks the body's absorption of natural sunlight. This was your book's example. And then, so that's a cause. Sunscreen blocks the body's absorption of natural sunlight. Then you give an effect. The body makes vitamin D when your skin is exposed to sunlight, so constant use of the sunscreen prohibits this. So very simple. There's a cause, there's an effect. We've talked about this kind of pattern before in a previous lecture, but this is one strategy you could use for for structuring your speech. That brings us to the second speech structure that you can use. So we just talked about speech as a fact. Speeches of value evaluate a topic or fact from a place of value. And I include this here for reference. Think attitudes. Remember, again, our previous lecture, we were talking about belief, attitudes, and behaviors. And basically, this speech kind of addresses the attitudes that someone may have about something. So you can't really factually, maybe you could factually argue whether or not Pepsi is better than Coca-Cola, but it really comes down to people's taste. But if we're talking about the taste of Pepsi and Coca-Cola, that's a value, right? You can't universally say Pepsi is better than Coca-Cola based off taste buds, because some people are going to say Coke tastes better, some people are going to say Pepsi tastes better. That's more of an opinion. It's a value. It's an attitude, you might say. So when it comes to this debate, you really can't make it a factual debate unless you're maybe talking about, I don't know, the concentration of how much sugar is in each one. If you're saying that one has less sugar than the other, that would be fact. But a speech of value is talking more about maybe the opinions you bring about those particular facts. And there are some examples that your book also talks about for the speech of value one. At least on my book, page 302, it gives the example that no-kill animal shelters are unethical. No-kill animal shelters are unethical. So you could talk about whether or not it's basically talking about the value of the system of treating animals, right? Another example would be government funding for NASA is worthwhile. Government funding for NASA is worthwhile. And the reason why that is an example of value is because of that word worthwhile, right? Can you factually measure the word worthwhile? No, you can't, because everyone might have a different perspective of what it means to be worthwhile, right? But at the end of the day, speech of value evaluates that topic or factual place from, the attitudes that you may have about the perspective. You may be very passionate about animal cruelty and treating animals with respect. So there would be a lot of passion and value that goes into that particular kind of speech. So some strategies you can use to implement these effective speeches of value. There's two different ones you can use. You can use a topical design, which basically is going point by point and providing supporting evidence. We've talked about this again in the past, so you can look at the book for more examples of what this could be, but this is one you can use. There's also a criteria design, which you would list the important criteria for why something is important. For example, you would put your thesis out there and you'd say maybe a low-carb diet is an excellent diet for a healthy lifestyle. And if you're like me during the quarantine, you have boxes of Cheez-Its, so I'm not living a healthy lifestyle. That would be an example, right? The thesis, and then here's the points. Here's the structure. An excellent diet should meet the following criteria, and then you would give those criteria, X, Y, Z, whatever they are. And then you would say a low-carb diet meets all of these criteria. So basically, the criteria design is you tell them what they need, you give your main point, then you tell them what specifically those criteria are, and then you tell them how your plan, what you're talking about meets those criteria. So that's another example. Finally, the last one is speeches of policy. So if we're thinking again about belief, attitudes, and behaviors, well, speech of policy impacts behavior. And probably the first thing you think about is politics or some sort of policy that needs to be passed about some particular action that needs to be taken. Your book also gives examples that talk about different kinds of policies that maybe people might try to implement. So one example your book gives is high-speed internet should be freely available to all citizens. Oh, I wish that were the case. My Wi-Fi is actually not that bad in my apartment. I actually really like it. So, but maybe that's a policy you would want to implement. Notice how it's not just a value, right? It's not that it's not a high-speed internet should be freely available. So it's not, it would be a value if it was high-speed internet should be something that all citizens should have, right? That would be more of like a value. But because you're saying it should be available, because it's something that we need to pass to change so that something can happen, that's what makes it policy. Another example that your book provides is putting astronauts on Mars should be NASA's #1 priority. That could be value, but the idea is that NASA should be prioritizing getting people to Mars. And basically that's a policy, that's an action. Get NASA to put more people on Mars. So you see, some of them blend together, fact, value, and policy. Sometimes there can be some overlap with them, but at the end of the day, fact basically talks about what is true or what is not true. Value talks about maybe the opinions or values you bring to a particular idea, and then policy just tells people flat out, this is what I want you to do. So that's how you distinguish between the three of them. And there are also 2 strategies you can implement for effective speeches of policy. One is a problem solution, which we've talked about. You would give your thesis, you would give your main point, which is the problem. The second point would be your solution. Problem, solution. But then there's another one that you could do, which is a problem, cause, solution. You have your thesis, and then what you can do is give your problem, tell them about what causes that problem. So you're just taking a second step compared to this one. You're basically saying, here's the problem, here's what causes this problem, and here's the solution I want to bring to the table for you all. These are pretty straightforward, self-explanatory. If you ever have any questions about those, let me know. So to debrief, basically today we talked about the 3 different kinds of speech types that you can address. Speeches of fact argue the truth or falsity of a belief, claim, or position. We looked at some examples of what those are, and we also talked about how you can use a refutative or causal strategy for that to structure it, and maybe you'll use that for your presentation. Who knows? There's also speeches of value, which evaluate a topic or fact from a place of value. Think attitudes, right, from the previous lecture. We talked about some examples. We also looked at how you can use a topic or criteria strategy to structure those. And then we talked finally about speeches of policy, which involve behavior or action. We gave some examples, and we also talked about how you can use a problem solution or problem cause solution strategy. Woo! I feel like that was so much I just said. But look at that, 13 minutes, not bad. We're getting better at this. You all are like, yay! So just as a recap for you all, week 12, again, we just covered now chapter 11, so now you have lecture material on chapters 10 and 11, so you should be good, at least for those parts. Next week we're going to get into a little bit more of the persuasion speech, but these are the ones we covered this week. Quiz 12 and the persuasive topic form are due this Friday, April 3rd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just make sure you get those in. This week is easier, so enjoy it. I think you're going to really enjoy not having as much to do, and if you've already gotten to this lecture, you've probably already done most of it, which is great. Last thing I encourage you to do is just make sure you go on to Blackboard and fill out those 2 assignments I gave you under the week 12 folder. Those will help you apply everything that we've now covered for chapter 10 and chapter 11. Basically, you will fill those documents out that I've posted under week 12, and then you will upload those to the links that I've given you, where everything will be on Blackboard. But you'll just upload those, and those will count as attendance for the week. So you do those, you get attendance, and then I'm going to give you activity points for one of those. I'll figure out which one they are. Last thing I wanted to leave you with, this is optional. Usually we would always have an activity in class, and I really wish we could have done this in person because I love showing these 3 clips to people in our classes. Basically what I have the classes do in the past is watch these 3 speeches from 3 iconic films. This movie about Gandhi. This is one about Joshua Chamberlain from the movie Gettysburg. And then this is about Martin Luther King Jr. from Selma. Three really great films if you haven't seen them. I'll show you. This is the option. This is the activity I will let you do. Basically, if you go to, not this, if you go to your, if you are on the channel, which I haven't uploaded them at this point, but I will give them. Here it is, right here. Speeches of fact, value, and policy. I have put them right here, these videos. So I have Gandhi, I have Selma, and I have Joshua Chamberlain's speech. I have these three right here. So what you can do, if you want, is you can go watch them, and then if you want to, you can come back to this video, comment down below what you think Gandhi's speech is. Is it fact, value, or policy? Is Chamberlain's fact, value, or policy? And is Martin Luther King Jr.'s, is his fact, value, or policy? That's optional, but if you want to increase your learning, you can do those three. And again, comment down below if you want to do that. Let me know what you think those are. They're pretty cool. I really love these movies. All right, well, if you have any questions, let me know, but that's it for this week in terms of lecture material. You guys have a great week.